On the night of their 5th wedding anniversary, Dr. Ethan Hayes, the most celebrated military surgeon at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, tossed a set of divorce papers onto the table. "Sign them," he said, his voice as cold and sterile as a scalpel. "You just don't fit into my world anymore." His wife simply looked at him in silence for a few seconds, then signed her name without a hint of hesitation. There were no tears, no pleading, as if she had been waiting for this day for a very long time. But the moment she walked out the door, the entire foundation of the medical center began to shake. Project Nightingale, the top-secret military medicine initiative that had made Ethan a living legend, was abruptly suspended. His commanding officer's furious voice roared over the phone. "Who authorized you to keep your name on this project when the core researcher has withdrawn?" Ethan was stunned, his voice hoarse. "Who are you talking about?" When he heard the name Dr. Anya Sharma, his hand began to tremble, and his heart felt like it had stopped, because that was the name of the wife he had just forced out of his life. He never knew that for the past 5 years, every battlefield trauma protocol, every groundbreaking study that built his reputation, every achievement that sent shockwaves through the medical community, had been her silent creation. The moment he signed those divorce papers was the moment he single-handedly discarded the one true genius of his life. But what Ethan Hayes couldn't possibly imagine was that the divorce wasn't the end. It was merely the beginning of the greatest nightmare of his career, because from the second Anya Sharma left that house, everything he had ever taken pride in would begin to crumble, piece by piece. And the secret she had buried for 5 years was about to be exposed to the world. That night, their small house was bathed in the soft yellow glow of a single lamp. On the dining table, 2 glasses of wine sat untouched. The anniversary cake, with 5 years written in delicate frosting, remained uncut. Anya sat quietly, her hands clenched slightly in her lap, holding on to a fragile hope that Ethan's long deployment was finally over. She hoped he would return as he always did, cold, perhaps, but at least still her husband. The door swung open. The man in the decorated army service uniform stepped inside. His handsome face showed no trace of fatigue or longing, only a chilling, impenetrable distance. He didn't look at the cake, nor did he look at her. He simply placed a folder on the table, his voice as decisive as a command in the operating room. "Sign it. We're getting a divorce." Anya froze, her heart constricting in her chest. She looked up at him, searching his eyes for a flicker of hesitation, for any remnant of the 5 years they had shared. But all she found was a cruel, unforgiving coldness. "Why?" she asked, her voice a near whisper, afraid of shattering the tense silence. Ethan's reply was curt. "You know exactly why. I need someone more suitable. I can't be held back by a useless wife forever." At that very moment, the door opened again. A young woman in a crisp white doctor's coat entered, a gentle smile on her face but a confident, proprietary gleam in her eyes. It was Dr. Jessica Vance, the rising star at Walter Reed, the one who was always seen by Ethan's side lately. She spoke softly. "Anya, you should understand. He belongs at a higher level." Anya looked at the two of them and let out a faint, humorless laugh. So this was it. All the months she had waited in silence, the nights she had stayed up poring over research documents, the times she had stood quietly in the background of his blinding success, all of it amounted to 2 words: useless wife. She didn't ask another question. She didn't beg. She picked up the pen, and with a calmness that was almost frightening, she signed her name, Anya Sharma. Ethan paused for a fraction of a second. He had expected her to cry, to plead, to cling to him as she had before. But no, the woman before him simply stood up, her voice light. "Done, as you wished." She walked towards the bedroom and returned with a suitcase that was already packed. Ethan frowned. "You were already prepared?" Anya didn't turn around. "Some things I've understood for a long time." The second the front door clicked shut behind her, Ethan's phone rang, the urgent, rapid tone signaling something was wrong. He answered, and his commanding officer's tense voice shot through the line. "Hayes, where are you?" "The Pentagon just suspended Project Nightingale." Ethan froze. "Suspended? Why?" The voice on the other end enunciated every word with grim precision. The lead researcher has withdrawn. Without her, the entire protocol collapses. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. Who is the lead researcher? There was a heavy silence, and then a name struck him like a bolt of lightning. Anya Sharma. The phone in his hand shook violently. His eyes darted to the door, where the silhouette of the woman dragging her suitcase was just disappearing down the hall. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. In that horrifying instant, he realized the papers he had just signed didn't just end a marriage. He may have just personally severed ties with the single most important person behind every achievement he had ever claimed as his own. Later that night, long after the call had ended, Ethan remained motionless in the living room, his hand clutching his phone so tightly his knuckles were white. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. Project Nightingale, the classified initiative that had made him an icon in military medicine, suspended because one person withdrew, and that person was Anya. He whipped his head back towards the door, but her shadow was long gone. A strange, suffocating feeling rose in his chest, as if something vital had been ripped away. But he tried to rationalize it. It's just a coincidence. What could she possibly know about advanced military medicine? The next morning, however, Walter Reed was in a state of unprecedented tension. An emergency briefing was called. Every department head was present, the atmosphere as heavy as the moments before a life-or-death surgery. Ethan walked in with his usual air of cold confidence, but this time it felt brittle. General Matheson, the hospital director, slammed a thick file on the conference table. "Explain this, Hayes. Why has the principal investigator of Nightingale suddenly vanished?" Ethan frowned. "Sir, with all due respect, I am the principal investigator." The room fell silent for a few seconds before Dr. Peterson, a veteran researcher, spoke slowly. "You were the face of the project, Ethan, the one who presented the final reports, but the one who wrote the protocols, designed the battlefield triage systems, and formulated the new drug compounds. That was always someone else." Ethan felt as if he'd been struck in the head. "Who?" he asked, his voice cracking. General Matheson's reply was icy. "Anya Sharma." The name echoed in the silent room, leaving Ethan utterly paralyzed. He shot to his feet. "That's impossible! She's just my wife, a homemaker. She's never—" Dr. Peterson gave a wry, humorless smile and pushed a file across the table towards him. "Look for yourself. These are the original handwritten drafts for the project. This handwriting, this AS initialed at the bottom of every page, does it look familiar?" Ethan stared at the pages, his heart pounding against his ribs. He had seen that elegant, precise script on countless late nights. He'd come home to find Anya at the desk under a small lamp, writing for hours. When he asked, she would just smile. "Oh, just jotting down some random thoughts." Random thoughts? The tension in the room thickened. The general's voice was stern. "Without her, the project is dead in the water. The Pentagon has given us a 48-hour deadline to find a replacement, or the entire battlefield medical support system is compromised." Ethan clenched his fists, a storm of confusion and rage brewing inside him. He couldn't accept that the woman he had just cast out of his life held the key to everything. Meanwhile, somewhere else, Anya dragged her suitcase out of the gates of a quiet suburban neighborhood. The cold wind blew through her hair, but her gaze was unusually serene. Her phone vibrated, an international number. "Professor Sharma, we have been waiting a very long time for you. The Global Combat Medicine Symposium is next week. Will you be making an appearance?" Anya closed her eyes for a moment, then answered, her voice soft but resolute. "I'll be there." She ended the call and glanced back in the direction of the life she'd left behind, the one where she had toiled in the shadows for 5 long years. This time, she would no longer be anyone's shadow. And Ethan Hayes would soon learn that their divorce wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. From the moment he let her go, he had pushed his only genius out into the world. After that emergency meeting, chaos descended upon Walter Reed. The doctors who had once sung Ethan's praises now looked at him with a mixture of suspicion and caution. He walked out of the conference room, the long hallway suddenly feeling suffocating, as if everything he once held firmly in his grasp was slipping through his fingers. He couldn't accept it. A woman like Anya, who had spent 5 years quietly at home, who had never attended a single conference, how could she be the mind behind achievements that had shaken the entire medical field? But the more he tried to deny it, the clearer the evidence in that file became. The handwriting, the detailed formulas, the strategic presentation, none of it was his. That evening, Ethan returned to the empty house. The small lamp on the desk was dark. The soft footsteps in the kitchen were gone. The aroma of the warm soup she always had waiting for him when he came home late was replaced by a cold, oppressive silence. He opened a drawer in his study, unconsciously searching for something, anything, and then he saw it. An old, worn-out notebook, its corners frayed. He frowned and opened it. The first page was filled with her familiar script. Battlefield triage protocol has shown. Test iteration #7, adjusting antibiotic dosage for high contamination environments. Note, must not let Ethan know. His hand trembled. Must not let him know. He flipped frantically through the pages, his heart growing heavier with each one. This wasn't a diary of random thoughts. It was a treasure trove of research, the very foundation of every successful surgery he had ever prided himself on. On one of the last pages, a single line made him choke. If the day comes when he no longer needs me, then I should also be ready to leave. Ethan gripped the notebook, his chest tightening as if in a vice. At the same time, back at the hospital, Jessica Vance appeared with a facade of feigned concern. She walked into General Matheson's office. "General, sir, I believe I can step in for Dr. Sharma on the project. I will help the hospital get through this crisis." But the general looked at her coldly. "Do you have any idea how complex that project is, doctor? Not just anyone can write an optimal trauma protocol for active combat conditions." Jessica bit her lip. I will do my best." The next day, she was tasked with a small experimental portion of the project. Within hours, her entire research team was at a dead end. Every solution she proposed had critical flaws and was completely impractical for real-world application. A young resident, unable to contain himself, muttered, "This is ridiculous. Dr. Sharma used to solve problems like this overnight." That comment was like a dagger to Ethan's pride. He was beginning to realize that Anya wasn't just an ordinary woman. She was the person this entire institution desperately needed. Meanwhile, Anya had arrived in another city. She walked into an international military research center where the world's leading experts were waiting. A distinguished-looking middle-aged man bowed his head respectfully. "Professor Sharma, you've finally agreed to come out of the shadows. With your participation, military medicine is about to enter a new era." Anya simply nodded, her expression calm but her eyes deep with unspoken history. She was no longer the woman standing behind someone else. That night, Ethan sat alone in the empty house, staring at the research notebook on the table. He finally understood a truth that sent a chill down his spine. If Anya Sharma was truly the mind behind it all, then he had just divorced a genius. And worse, he had pushed her out of his life at the very moment she was about to step into her own brilliant spotlight. The following day, Walter Reed descended into unprecedented chaos. Medevac helicopters brought in a continuous stream of casualties from the front lines. The emergency room was overflowing, the sound of running footsteps echoing through the halls. But what worried the medical staff wasn't the number of patients, it was the directive that had just come down from the Pentagon. Project Nightingale's protocols had to be restored immediately, or the entire military medical support chain was at risk of collapse. General Matheson stood in the briefing room, his face grim. "We're out of time. The only person who understands this project inside and out is Anya Sharma." A department head said anxiously, "But she's gone. No one can reach her." The air was thick with tension. All eyes slowly turned to Ethan. He sat in silence, his hands clenched, his pride and bewilderment at war within him. He still couldn't believe that Anya's name had become the key to the survival of the entire hospital. Just then, the door opened, and a high-ranking officer from the Department of Defense walked in, his voice like cold steel. "Dr. Hayes, with me." Ethan stood, his heart pounding. In a private office, the officer threw a thick dossier on the desk, his eyes sharp. "You really thought you were the architect of all this success, didn't you?" Ethan frowned. "I performed the surgeries. I saved the lives. You were the hands." The officer cut him off. "But the mind that created the protocols, the new drugs, the optimal procedures, that was someone else, and it wasn't you." He flipped to the last page and pointed at the AS signature. "Recognize this?" Ethan stared at it, his throat completely dry. He knew it all too well. The officer's voice was severe. "Anya Sharma isn't just your ex-wife, doctor. She is a top-tier expert whose identity has been classified for years. She worked on this project covertly for one reason and one reason only: you." That sentence was like a hammer blow. Ethan shot up from his chair. "Impossible. She never said a word." "Of course she didn't," the officer said icily. "She didn't want you to feel pressured, and she didn't want you to be scrutinized. But what did you do? You forced her to sign divorce papers." In that moment, Ethan felt his entire world turn upside down. He remembered Anya's calm expression that night, her faint smile as she signed her name. Her final words, "Some things I've understood for a long time." She had understood, all right. She understood that he would never recognize her value until he had lost it. At the same time, back in the lab, Jessica Vance was still trying to prove herself. She stood before the research team, declaring loudly, "We don't need Anya Sharma. I can complete this project." But in a single small-scale simulation, the protocol she designed failed catastrophically. A young doctor cried out in panic, "If we applied this in the field, the mortality rate would double." Jessica's face went pale, her voice cracking. "That can't be right." The skeptical gazes of her colleagues closed in around her. That afternoon, General Matheson received an email from an international source. The message was brief, but it left the entire hospital leadership stunned. "Professor Anya Sharma has confirmed her participation in the Global Combat Medicine Symposium as the lead researcher and keynote speaker." The room fell silent. The general let out a long sigh. She stepped into the light. The news spread like wildfire. A woman once considered a nameless nobody was now emerging with an identity no one could have ever imagined. Ethan stood in the hospital corridor, watching the frantic activity around him, feeling completely hollow. He finally understood. From the second Anya left, it wasn't just a project that had collapsed, it was his entire life. He whispered her name, his voice raw and broken. "Anya, who are you?" But that was a question he would have to find the answer to himself. In the days that followed, the name Anya Sharma became the focal point of all conversation at Walter Reed. The woman who had once stood silently in Ethan's shadow was now mentioned in urgent briefings, in classified reports, and even in direct calls from the Pentagon. Ethan barely slept. A single question echoed in his mind. Who is Anya Sharma? He couldn't comprehend it. The woman who had shared his home for 5 years, always gentle, quiet, never boasting about anything, how could she be a top-tier expert with a classified identity? Late one night, he returned to his office at the hospital and reopened the entire project file. He went through it page by page, line by line, a chill growing in his bones. The analysis was too precise, the solutions for harsh battlefield conditions too brilliant, the formulas for new medications far beyond the level of any ordinary doctor. At the bottom of every draft was that small, elegant signature, AS. He gripped the papers, his voice hoarse. It was all you. Just then, Dr. Peterson, the senior researcher who had been on the project from the beginning, walked in. He looked at Ethan for a long time before sighing. "You still don't get it, do you? Your meteoric rise wasn't a matter of luck." Ethan turned, his eyes full of turmoil. You knew from the start." Dr. Peterson nodded slowly. "Anya was selected from the Central Research Institute. She was a prodigy in military medicine, but for a very specific reason, she agreed to remain anonymous and stay out of the public eye." "What reason?" Ethan demanded. Dr. Peterson looked him straight in the eye. You. The words struck Ethan like a physical blow. The professor continued, his voice low. Back then, you were new to the service, young and inexperienced. Anya quietly helped you perfect every report, corrected every protocol, and even solved your most difficult cases on paper. She said that as long as you could stand tall, she would stand behind you. Ethan felt his throat tighten. He remembered all the nights he'd brought files home, frustrated and stuck. And then, the next morning, the solution would be perfectly laid out. He had always thought it was a sudden stroke of his own genius. It wasn't. It was her. It had always been her. Meanwhile, in another part of the world, Anya had arrived at the International Conference Center. She walked in wearing a simple, professional dress, but her presence commanded a quiet authority that made people instinctively step aside. A group of foreign experts immediately approached her. Professor Sharma, you've finally appeared. We have studied your anonymous protocols for years. Military medicine needs you. Anya simply gave a slight nod, her expression serene. For the first time, she wasn't hiding in the darkness. At the same time, back at Walter Reed, Jessica Vance was starting to panic. She realized things were spiraling out of her control. The praise she once received had turned into suspicious stares. An internal investigation was launched, and old reports were being re-examined. The AS initials became more and more prominent. General Matheson announced coldly, "Effective today, all project-related achievements will be re-investigated. Anyone found to have taken false credit will face the consequences." Jessica's face went white, her hands trembling. As for Ethan, he stood in the long, empty hallway, feeling as if his world was collapsing. He had once been so proud to be the god of military surgery, but now he understood that the halo had never belonged to him. He remembered the night of the divorce, his own cold words, "You're not worthy." Thinking back on it now, the phrase was a joke. The one who was unworthy was him. That night, he sat alone in the silent house, staring at the wedding ring still on the table. For the first time in his life, the arrogant Dr. Ethan Hayes felt fear. He realized that what he had lost was not just a marriage, but the only person who had ever loved him enough to hide her own brilliance just to lift him to the top. And now that Anya had stepped into the light, what could he possibly do to get her back? After the truth began to surface, Ethan could no longer hide. The same hospital hallways where he once walked with immense pride now felt heavy with judgment. He felt the eyes of his colleagues on him, their gazes no longer filled with respect, but with re-evaluation and even suspicion. He had thought he was standing on a summit, but now he knew that summit had been built entirely by Anya. That morning, General Matheson convened another major briefing. The entire leadership and research team was present, the atmosphere taut. The general looked directly at Ethan. "The Pentagon has issued a directive. If we cannot persuade Dr. Sharma to return, the project will be transferred to an international research center. Walter Reed will lose its lead role." A department head said worriedly, "We can't let that happen. This is the honor of our entire branch." Ethan clenched his fists, his voice hoarse. "I'll go find her." The room was silent. No one said it, but everyone knew. The only person who could possibly bring Anya back was the very person who had driven her away. That afternoon, Ethan received the schedule for the International Symposium. Anya was slated to give the keynote address in front of hundreds of military medical experts. He booked a flight immediately. On the plane, Ethan stared out the window, his mind a blank. He thought about all the years he had been busy with surgeries and missions, while Anya was always at home, waiting, never complaining. He had taken it for granted. Now he understood that her quiet presence had been a gift he had carelessly thrown away. When he arrived at the conference, he entered the vast auditorium. A giant screen on stage displayed the title of the presentation, "A Paradigm Shift in Modern Combat Medicine" by Professor Anya Sharma. His heart hammered in his chest, and then she appeared. Anya walked onto the stage under the bright lights. Her figure was slender, but her presence silenced the entire room. She was no longer the quiet, gentle wife in his kitchen, but a true expert, her gaze sharp, her voice calm and authoritative. She began her presentation. The data she presented left every expert in the room astonished. Optimal battlefield trauma protocols, new pharmaceutical advancements, innovative emergency surgical techniques. These were the very things the global military medical community had been striving for. The entire hall rose to its feet in a thunderous standing ovation. Ethan sat frozen in a back row seat. He had never seen her like this. He never knew the woman he had called useless could shine so brilliantly. After the presentation, people swarmed around Anya, respectfully calling her professor, asking for collaborations, requesting her autograph. She responded with calm grace, neither arrogant nor defensive. Ethan stood amidst the crowd, feeling pathetically small. He pushed his way to the front. "Anya," he said, his voice raw. She turned. Her eyes landed on his face, showing no surprise, no emotion, just the detached calm of a stranger. "What are you doing here?" Her simple question felt like a knife twisting in his gut. Ethan clenched his hands. "I came to ask you to come back. The hospital needs you. The project needs you." Anya gave a small, faint smile, one that held none of its former warmth. "Does the hospital need me, Ethan? Or do you need me?" He was speechless. She stepped closer, her voice low and measured. "The day you forced me to sign those papers, you told me I wasn't worthy. So why are you here now? Because you finally realized I have value?" Every word stripped away his defenses. Ethan stood motionless, the pain in his chest making it hard to breathe. Anya looked at him for one last second, then turned away. "You made your choice, and now I've made mine." She walked away, surrounded by the glow of admiration and respect, leaving him standing there, experiencing the true feeling of loss for the first time. He suddenly understood that none of the achievements he had prided himself on were his, and the person who had created them no longer belonged to him either. After their brief encounter at the conference, Ethan was completely overwhelmed by a sense of emptiness. He stood in the grand hall, watching Anya's retreating back. She was surrounded by the world's leading experts, bathed in the praise and glory he had once believed was his alone. All he had left was regret, but the real shock was yet to come. The next day, the symposium entered its most important session, the Global Military Medicine Achievement Awards. The auditorium was packed with high-ranking officials and international media. Ethan sat in the back, his heart like a stone, no longer sure why he was even there. To apologize, or to witness firsthand the truth he had tried so hard to deny? On stage, the presenter's voice was formal and resonant. "Today, we honor an individual who has created the single greatest breakthrough in modern military medicine. The mind behind a series of revolutionary battlefield protocols and new drug research that has been widely implemented." The entire hall held its breath, and then the name was announced, striking Ethan's heart like a physical blow. "Please welcome Professor Anya Sharma." The applause was deafening. Anya walked onto the stage, her face serene, her presence so powerful that she commanded the entire room's attention just by appearing. She was no longer the silent woman in that small house. She stood on that stage like a true icon. Ethan was stunned. He remembered the night of the divorce, his cold pronouncement that she wasn't worthy. Now, he was the one unworthy to even stand next to her. The presenter continued, his voice growing more solemn. "The achievements we honor today were, for many years, hidden under another name. The person truly behind them is finally stepping into the light." A murmur went through the crowd. Ethan felt the blood freeze in his veins, because he knew that other name was his. Anya accepted the medal, her gaze sweeping across the auditorium before resting for a single second on him. There was no resentment, no lingering affection, just the look one gives a stranger, as if their 5 years together had never happened. In that moment, a sharp pain shot through Ethan's heart. After the ceremony, the news exploded. Hidden genius of military medicine, Anya Sharma, revealed. The woman behind surgical god Ethan Hayes was his ex-wife. Years of concealed achievements finally recognized. Back home, Walter Reed was in an uproar. General Matheson received a barrage of calls from his superiors, demanding to know why a national-level talent had been so grievously mishandled. No one had an answer. At the same time, Jessica Vance was on edge. She watched the news reports, her face ashen. She had thought Anya was just an ordinary wife who would disappear forever after being discarded. But now, Anya stood at the pinnacle of their field, while Jessica was becoming a laughingstock. That evening, the hospital's internal investigation intensified. Ethan's past achievements were scrutinized. Every report, every project, every manuscript was cross-referenced. A young doctor shakily confirmed that the most critical protocols were all written by Anya. The general slammed his fist on the table, demanding a full accounting of Jessica Vance's true role, the woman who had claimed to be Ethan's key assistant. The atmosphere became glacial. Jessica panicked, trying to defend herself, but no one believed her anymore. Meanwhile, Ethan returned to his hotel room and sat alone in the dark. He pulled up Anya's number on his phone, his thumb hovering over the call button for a long time, but he couldn't bring himself to press it. He understood that from the moment she stepped on that stage, the distance between them was no longer just a divorce. They were worlds apart. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost a genius who had once hidden her own light for his sake. And now that she was shining so brilliantly, he no longer had any right to even touch that light. After the awards ceremony, Anya Sharma became a household name in the world of military medicine. Offers for collaboration and international projects poured in. As for Ethan Hayes, the man once at the top, he was now like a ghost left behind in the world he once dominated. He returned to the United States in a daze. The adoring atmosphere at Walter Reed was gone, replaced by cautious glances, tense meetings, and unavoidable whispers. Is Dr. Hayes really as good as they said? I heard his ex-wife wrote everything. The comments were like needles piercing his pride, but the deepest pain wasn't the loss of his reputation. It was the crushing realization that he had personally pushed away the most important person in his life. That evening, General Matheson summoned him to his office. His voice was heavy. Ethan, you're the only one who might be able to reach her. If she doesn't come back, the hospital loses the project, and you will lose your position. Ethan was silent for a long time before replying in a raw voice, I'll go find her. He didn't know if he was doing it for the hospital or for himself, only that if he didn't see Anya again, he wouldn't be able to breathe. That night, he stood in front of their old house. Everything looked the same, yet it felt terrifyingly empty. He stared into the darkness, remembering the meals she cooked, the times she waited up for him, the nights she spent hunched over her desk. He had thought it was just the ordinary sacrifice of a wife. Now he understood it was a love so immense she was willing to bury her talent to elevate him. He took out his phone and, for the first time, initiated the call. It rang for a long time before her voice came through, calm and cold. Hello? That single word made his heart clench. Anya, it's me. The line was silent for a few seconds before she asked, Is there something you need? Her tone was so distant, as if they had never been husband and wife. Ethan gripped the phone tighter, his voice cracking. I want to see you. There's no need. The two words were as sharp as a scalpel. He took a deep breath, his words tumbling out in a rush. I was wrong. I truly didn't know that everything was you. Anya laughed softly on the other end, but there was no warmth in it. You didn't know, Ethan? Or you never wanted to know? The question left him speechless. He quickly added, I'm sorry. I want to make it up to you. Anya was quiet for a long moment before her voice came through, slow and deliberate. Ethan, you forced me to sign divorce papers. You told me I wasn't worthy. So what are you apologizing for now? Because you've realized I have value? Each word exposed the ugly truth. Ethan felt backed into a corner. He blurted out, his voice thick with desperation. No, I need you. I really need you. Do you need the project, the reputation, or do you need me? That question silenced him completely. Finally, he managed to say, his voice trembling, I need you, Anya. I can't lose you. There was a dead silence on the line. Then, Anya spoke, her words soft but devastatingly clear. You already have. She hung up. Ethan stood frozen in the night, the world collapsing around him. One phone call couldn't bring her back. One apology couldn't erase the damage he had done. At the same time, at the hospital, the investigation into Jessica Vance was reaching its climax. Evidence of her fraud was piling up. She frantically tried to find a way out, but it was too late. And somewhere else, Anya stood by a window, looking out at the brightly lit city, her expression calm. She was no longer a woman living for a marriage. This time, she would live for herself. Chapter 8 closed with Ethan, realizing that an apology was not a key, and his quest to win her back was only just beginning its most painful phase. After that phone call, Ethan was completely lost. He realized the cruel truth that a simple "I'm sorry" could not bring Anya back, nor could it erase the wounds he had inflicted. But before he could even process his next move, another, more violent storm hit Walter Reed. The internal investigation entered its most aggressive phase. The general personally signed an order to review every file related to Project Nightingale from the past 5 years. Every report, every commendation, every award was now under a microscope. The names that were once celebrated were now subjects of intense scrutiny. In the conference room, the air was suffocating. An investigator from the Inspector General's office slammed a thick binder on the table, his voice like ice. "We have confirmed it. The author of the original project manuscripts was not Dr. Ethan Hayes. The core researcher and principal investigator was Dr. Anya Sharma." The room was silent. The general slowly turned to Jessica Vance, his eyes sharp. "Dr. Vance, you repeatedly claimed to be the project's key assistant. How do you explain this?" Jessica's face was ashen, her lips trembling. I was just providing support." The investigator immediately threw down another stack of papers, each page bearing a forged signature. "You did more than provide support. You deliberately signed your name to research that wasn't yours and leveraged Dr. Hayes' name to claim credit." Jessica shot to her feet in a panic. "No, it wasn't intentional. It was because everyone thought I was worthy." Her words only made the room colder. A department head couldn't help but snap, "Worthy?" Without Dr. Sharma, you couldn't even comprehend the basic protocol. Jessica's face flushed with a mixture of shame and fear. She turned to Ethan, her eyes pleading, "Ethan, say something, help me." But Ethan just sat there, motionless. He looked at her, a bitter taste filling his mouth. This was the woman who had convinced him she was his perfect partner, but it had all been a mask. The general's voice was grim. "Dr. Vance, do you understand the consequences? This isn't about reputation. This is a project directly tied to the lives of soldiers on the battlefield." Jessica burst into tears, her voice breaking. "I just wanted to stand next to him. I didn't want to be invisible forever." The investigator delivered the final verdict coldly. "You have taken false credit, falsified official records, and caused severe disruption to a critical military project. As of today, your medical license is suspended, pending a full hearing." The words were a final sentence. Jessica collapsed to the floor, her face completely white. The news ripped through the hospital. The woman once hailed as a rising star was now a disgrace, and the name Anya Sharma was spoken with even greater reverence, a symbol of irreplaceable genius. But what pained Ethan the most wasn't Jessica's downfall. It was the realization that he was not innocent. He had stood in that stolen spotlight for so long that he had forgotten who had placed it on him. Late that night, the general called him in again. His voice was low. "You know, Ethan, if Anya wanted to, she could take everything back, including your entire reputation. But she hasn't. That's because she still has integrity." Ethan stood there, frozen. Integrity. A person so deeply wounded still chose to walk away quietly, still chose not to destroy him. Was that integrity, or had she simply let go of him completely? Meanwhile, far away, Anya received a text message about the investigation's outcome. She glanced at it, her expression unchanged. Jessica Vance exposed, Ethan Hayes' reputation crumbling, none of it mattered anymore. What mattered was that from this day forward, she would never have to live in anyone's shadow again. After Jessica Vance's suspension, a heavy silence fell over Walter Reed. No one dared to mention her name, but the scandal she left behind made everyone more afraid. The truth was now painfully clear. The person who had propped up their entire military medicine program for years was never Ethan Hayes. It was Anya Sharma. In the following days, pressure from the Pentagon mounted. The general received a constant stream of urgent communications, demanding the immediate restoration of Project Nightingale. But the more they tried, the more they failed. Without Anya, no one could complete the most critical protocols. Ethan stood in the middle of the hospital, watching young doctors rush around in a panic, feeling completely hollow. He had once seen himself as the pillar holding everything up, but now he felt like a useless bystander. Then, one morning, a shocking announcement from the Department of Defense was sent to the entire hospital. A formal ceremony would be held to award the Distinguished Service Medal, the highest non-combat honor, to the individual with the single greatest contribution to modern military medicine. The name announced was Dr. Anya Sharma. The news was like a lightning strike. The general was stunned. The department heads were speechless, and Ethan stood as if turned to stone. He had thought she had left to hide, but he was wrong. She wasn't hiding. She was stepping into the light. On the day of the ceremony, the formal auditorium was filled with high-ranking officials. Generals, admirals, and the nation's top professors were all in attendance. Ethan was required to be there, but for him, it felt more like a sentencing than a celebration. He sat in a lower-level seat, his eyes bloodshot, his heart feeling like it was being torn apart. On stage, a representative from the Joint Chiefs of Staff spoke with a powerful voice. For many years, our military medicine has made incredible leaps forward thanks to the silent dedication of one person, an individual who refused fame, who remained anonymous in the shadows, solely to ensure that our battlefield trauma systems were perfected. The hall was silent. That person is Professor Anya Sharma. The applause was thunderous. Anya walked out, dressed in a simple but elegant suit, her presence commanding the respect of everyone in the room. The spotlight illuminated her calm, determined face as she accepted the nation's highest honor, a symbol of absolute recognition. In that moment, Ethan felt his breath catch in his throat. He remembered the years she had spent quietly at home, the nights she had worked tirelessly, the times he had coldly turned his back on her, completely unaware that she was carrying the weight of the world for him. He had been so proud of himself, but now all he felt was shame. The representative continued, his voice grave. There is one more thing that must be clarified. For years, these achievements were attributed to another name, but the true creator of it all was Dr. Sharma. From this day forward, all credit will be returned to its rightful owner. A stir went through the audience. Eyes began to turn towards Ethan. He sat there, feeling as if he had been stripped naked in front of hundreds of people. Anya stood on the stage, and her gaze swept over the room, pausing on him for a brief moment. She said nothing. She simply turned away. That silence was more painful than any accusation could ever be. After the ceremony, dozens of people crowded around Anya, calling her an icon, the pride of military medicine. Ethan stood alone in a dark corner. No one looked at him like an idol anymore. He finally understood. Today wasn't just the day Anya was honored. It was the day he officially lost everything. The reputation he once had, the position he once held, the glory he once reveled in it was all gone. And the most painful part was that he had no one to blame but himself. After the medal ceremony, Anya's reputation soared. She became the new face of military medicine, her name mentioned in every high-level meeting and strategic plan. As for Ethan, the man once hailed as a surgical god, he fell into a terrifying silence. He left the auditorium under the gaze of his peers, which was no longer filled with respect, but with a mixture of pity and judgment. Back at the hospital, the official decision came down swiftly. Ethan was formally removed from his position as project director, and all of his special authorities were revoked. He stood in his empty office and watched as the nameplate that had once been his greatest pride was taken down. It felt as if a part of his life had been ripped away. But he couldn't protest. He knew this was the consequence of his own blindness and arrogance. In the days that followed, he became a ghost. No one crowded around him for advice, no one sang his praises. All that remained was the echo of his footsteps in the long, empty corridors and the suffocating loneliness that surrounded him. He began to remember the smallest details of their marriage, things he had never paid attention to before. Anya had always been quiet, always gentle, but never weak. She had loved him by silently lifting him up, and he had repaid her by coldly pushing her down. Meanwhile, Enya returned to Washington, D.C., to a formal welcome from the professional community. A new, state-of-the-art research center was established, and she was invited to be its director. Young researchers looked at her with awe and admiration. For the first time, she didn't have to stand behind anyone. She was the light. One evening, Ethan stood outside the gates of the new research center, waiting for a long time. When Anya walked out, he immediately stepped forward. A cold wind blew, but he stood tall like a soldier, his eyes red-rimmed. "Anya," he said, his voice raw. She stopped, looking at him with the same calm, detached expression of a stranger. "What else do you want?" Ethan clenched his fists, his voice trembling. "I came to beg you. Give me a chance. I know I was wrong. I was so wrong." Anya let out a small, humorless laugh. "A chance? Ethan, the day you threw those divorce papers on the table, did you give me a chance?" The words made him choke. He took a step closer, his voice almost a plea. "We can start over. I'll make up for everything." Anya looked at him, her gaze deep and unreadable. "Do you want to start over because you love me, or because you can't stand losing something that once belonged to you?" Ethan froze, wanting to answer but having no words. Finally, in a moment of utter desperation, he dropped to his knees right there at the entrance, ignoring the shocked stares of passers-by. His voice broke. "I'm sorry. I am so sorry. I was wrong to look down on you, wrong to think you were just a shadow. I'm not worthy, but I can't lose you." The sight was shocking. The once arrogant military surgeon on his knees before his ex-wife. But Anya just stood there, her expression unmoved. She looked down at him for a long moment before speaking slowly. "Ethan, your kneeling doesn't hurt me anymore, but it won't bring me back either." She stepped forward, leaning down slightly, her voice calm but sharp as a razor. "I once loved you enough to hide my own light to stand behind you. But you were the one who cut that cord. From the moment I signed my name, I had already started over." With that, she turned and walked away. Ethan remained on his knees, his eyes burning, unable to stop her. He finally understood. He had well and truly lost her. Not because she hated him, but because she no longer needed him. After the night Ethan knelt outside the research center, the story spread quickly through the military medical community. The man who had once stood arrogantly at the summit became a symbol of belated regret. But Anya no longer cared. She refused to be bound by the past or live in anyone's shadow. In the following weeks, the research center under her leadership became fully operational. New projects were launched, and her advanced battlefield protocols were implemented across the armed forces. She became a mentor to an entire generation of young doctors. In every meeting, in every study, she was calm and decisive, her eyes shining with the clarity of someone who had fully emerged from the darkness. As for Ethan, he gradually faded from the major conferences. He was no longer called a surgical god, no longer stood at the center of attention. He went back to being an ordinary military doctor, quietly taking on difficult cases on the front lines. He didn't complain or resist. For him, every day was an act of penance, but he knew that some things could never be earned back, no matter how much atonement he offered. A month later, the National Military Medicine Conference was held. It was the biggest event of the year, and the person invited to give the keynote address was, of course, Anya Sharma. The auditorium was packed. When Anya walked onto the stage, the entire room rose in a standing ovation. No one remembered her as just Ethan Hayes' wife. She was herself now, an icon of modern military medicine. Ethan was there, too, sitting in the back. He watched her in silence, his heart a mixture of pain and pride, a pride that only deepened his own sense of loss. Anya looked out at the audience, her voice clear, calm, and full of weight. She didn't speak of the past or mention her own pain. She spoke only of the future, of the responsibility of saving lives, and of the resilience of those who work tirelessly in the shadows. Then she paused, her gaze deep, as if speaking to her past self. "There is one thing I wish to share," she said slowly. "Many people once believed that a woman's value is defined by the man she stands beside, but that is not true. A woman's true value lies in who she is." The auditorium was utterly silent. Anya continued, her voice growing stronger. "I once chose to step back. I chose to hide my own light for the sake of love. But I realized that if you bury yourself for someone else, you will eventually lose yourself. From the moment I stepped out of that darkness, I understood that a woman doesn't need anyone's permission to shine. She only needs to not give up on herself." The applause that followed was explosive, like a tidal wave. Ethan sat there, his eyes turning red. He understood her speech wasn't meant to condemn him. It was her final closure with the past. She had moved on, leaving the painful memories behind. After the conference, Anya was surrounded by a crowd of admirers. As she passed the back row, Ethan stood up, wanting to say something, but he remained silent. He knew any words he offered now were far too late. Anya gave him a fleeting glance, her expression as placid as a breeze passing by, and then continued on, without looking back. In that moment, Ethan finally understood. He hadn't lost her because she left. He had lost her because he had failed to cherish her when she was still there. He had single-handedly discarded the one and only genius of his life, the woman who had once loved him more than she loved herself. And Anya. She walked out of the auditorium, into the brilliant afternoon sun, the wind gently blowing through her hair. Before her was an open future, a path she would walk on her own 2 feet, no longer obscured by anyone. And so, the story closes with Anya finally emerging from the shadows to become her own radiant light. She was no longer the wife standing behind a great man, no longer the overlooked shadow, but a genius revered by her entire field. As for Ethan, he was left to watch from a distance, forever carrying the profound regret of a man who threw away the most precious thing in his life. Because sometimes, the greatest pain isn't in the leaving, but in the realization that the person you once took for granted was, in fact, your entire world. Dear listeners who have accompanied me until the end of my story, how did you find today's tale? I'm curious about the impression it has left in your hearts and the thoughts it has sparked in you. Please feel free to share your impressions and opinions in the comments. I will carefully read each of them. The likes and subscriptions you give me are the greatest source of strength and motivation for creating better stories in the future. Please don't forget to do so. I sincerely wish that your life is always filled with happiness and good fortune, and that the warm light in your hearts never fades.